We'll be getting started in just a few moments. And Joan, you win the award, recognizing the bed frame here at Common Grounds Retreat Property in Prairie Farm, Wisconsin, about 83 miles east of Minneapolis and St. Paul, where we have been developing this retreat property now for a while. And a few volunteers are out this week, and now that we're almost completely done with the renovation, we're clearing out the barn that has accumulated a lot of stuff over these last 3 years of renovating the property. So we have a big dumpster here and we're going through the stuff. So that's why the background looks a little different tonight. And as you know, we've been chanting the Three Refuges. So in just a minute or two, we'll do that. If you need the words in front of you, I believe the chant has been sent out earlier and possibly is there. The link is there below the screen, the YouTube screen, or those of you who are skilled can paste the Three Refuges in the live chat. So anybody who's new will have those words to chant along. And as we get ready to start, you can remember the three refuges that we chant. It's a way of aligning with the many, many, many folks before us, probably into the future, who have found inspiration with these teachings. And just that sense of, oh, thank you, whoever just put the refuges there for folks. And it's just a reminder, it's really Buddhist code for this wakefulness, this stable, kind, mindful presence, mindful awareness, meeting, being intimate with Dhamma the way it is. Buddha knows Dhamma. Buddha wakes up. Buddha is intimate with Dhamma the way it is. And with that intimacy, Buddha knowing Dhamma, we can actually participate in the world in a beautiful, wise way, a compassionate way, and that's Sangha. Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And it's traditional to chant these three refuges 3 times, so we'll do that. And in this way, we do it at the beginning of Buddhist studies. We do it more slowly than is traditional. And when we're together in the same room, it's really a nice way of coming together, singing like this or chanting like this. So we'll continue to do it tonight. Buddhang saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhang saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. Tatyampi Buddhang saranam gacchami. Tatyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami. Tatyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. So if you need to make adjustments so you're settling for our meditation time together. And as we settle into a relative stillness, a relative ease, comfortable, upright posture, we can contemplate contentment with the conditions that are here. So we're practicing perceiving the moment, the conditions that are here in a way that is conducive of contentment, contentedness, instead of dissatisfaction and restlessness. So in a not forced way, we're constructing or finding an experience of contentment here and now with the conditions as they are. The sensations here in the body are adequate to support the ease of contentment and the quality of the mind, the mood, good enough for the heart to be content and at ease, accepting. And even the wider world, as wild and imperfect as it might be. But maybe for this moment it's possible to be at ease, to be okay with the conditions as they are. Not saying that things are perfect, certainly not saying that people aren't suffering, of course they are. But maybe it's okay to make peace with the conditions of this body, this heart, this world for this moment. Maybe it's not inappropriate to allow contentment to momentarily arise. And to touch or to receive the ordinary but beautiful experience of that, the ease of contentment, the peace of not needing the moment to be different than it is. Don't be ashamed or don't be convinced that that's not okay. To allow in this sense of contentment and acceptance. And of course, you might find that something's in the way of this settling and accepting and feeling the ease of contentedness. And then that's a curious thing, whatever might be in the way. Oh, this uneasiness is dukkha. It should be understood. Can I be at ease with this unease, this dis-ease? Can I be interested? Not in denial, not attempting to fix or control, but just wishing to understand, wishing to see clearly. So what we've probably found over these several weeks of practice now, initially attuning to the experience of dukkha, this uneasiness and dissatisfaction and stressfulness of the heart. What we found is it's really not so easy to let it be our teacher. We immediately want to figure it out or make it go away or explain it. So what really helps is to take some time to cultivate contentment, because then when something gets in the way of that ease, that contentedness, then we might be able to study this arising of dukkha, this expression of dissatisfaction or uneasiness, and to see it as a natural phenomena showing up, something to be understood. So again, now for some silence, we're just sitting here, interested in being content with the conditions that are here, and interested in what gets in the way of contentment and ease, and willing to study what's moving, what appears to be in the way of contentment and ease, and willing to study it as a natural phenomena. And the more stability we have with dukkha, we see that its cause, craving, wanting things to be other than they are, that arises, and with patience we might observe it ceasing, craving ends. And to help keep contentment and ease in mind, of course, it's always okay to use meditation words. So, for example, as you're breathing in, you could repeat the word ease. And as you're breathing out in a relaxed, natural way, contentment with the way it is now, or something similar. Keep it simple. We're keeping ease and contentment in mind, and then naturally interested in whatever arises that seems to be in the way. Oh, my teacher. So, in this simple study we're doing during the meditation, ease or freedom is when the heart doesn't need the moment to be different or other than what it is. And suffering or dukkha is when the heart and mind seems to want or need the moment to be different than it is. Somebody needs things to be different, wants things to be different. And we're contemplating both the contentedness when that's what's happening and the discontentment when that's what's happening. Curious about discontentment, what in Buddhism we call craving, where the mind is identified with the desire of wanting things to be different. Like there's somebody who has a personal stake in things being different. I will personally get something if what I want happens. I'll be personally harmed if what I want doesn't happen or hurt. So we need to express some confidence that it's possible, at least, to be content with the conditions as they are right now. Even if it's just for a few moments of trusting and relaxing and allowing and feeling content. And then we get this moment of that contentment being disrupted when the next desire and the next attachment to the desire arise. And in that stable presence, we see how craving takes birth in the heart, and with it comes stress, or that squeeze. The heart's burdened with the desiring and the attachment to the desire. So we want to get very curious about the birth of craving, that movement from a moment of being relatively content, at ease, to the next moment of craving, wanting something to happen, and the disturbance or the squeeze that comes with that. And then as we stabilize this curious and kind attention, we can also notice the ending of craving. Craving arises, craving also ceases. Is it possible with mindful awareness, this stable, wise attention, to notice not just when craving arises in the heart, but a moment when craving ceases? Not because we gratified the desire, but even without the desire being gratified, craving ceases. And this is what we call contemplating the truth, the reality of craving as a natural and impersonal phenomena or pattern, a frequent visitor to our heart. So we'll take the next 6 minutes or so to continue this reflection in silence. So finishing now, let the eyes open if they've been closed. Adjust the body. So again, welcome everyone. This is week 4 of our Buddhist Studies class on the Four Noble Truths. And this week in particular, we're looking at the second Noble Truth, this truth that suffering, dissatisfaction, stress arises naturally, conditionally, and that natural arising can be understood. Just going to take care of some business here. Okay. I think I put this in our resources from Ajahn Thanisaro, this American Buddhist monk and wonderful scholar. And he's really paraphrasing the Buddha here. He says, the path develops the qualities of mind needed to see that all the possible objects of craving, right, this activity of the body and the mind, are stressful, inconstant, and not self. So in a way, this is the story of our life. You know, if we just observe, mindfully observe what we do, we find that we're craving one thing after another. And we keep looking for craving something that actually leads to satisfaction. But we've been craving this and craving that for a long time. And what have we gotten for it? That's the question. He continues writing, as a result, one grows dispassionate toward them, right? Toward these activities of the body and mind, toward our experiences. With nothing left to focus on, craving disbands. When one experiences the remainderless fading, cessation, renunciation, relinquishment, release, and letting go of that very craving, the problem is solved. And so he's quoting one of the Buddhist texts there. When one experiences the remainderless fading, cessation, renunciation, relinquishment, release, and letting go of that craving, the problem is solved. And the most common way the Buddha talks about this path of awakening and the full release, the unshakable release of the heart, is that a realization of the mind, this heart, free of grasping. Now, have we noticed that? So that's kind of the project for this part of the course. And those of you who are going to stay at 8:35 for the small groups tonight, or find somebody to reflect with later this week, you know, we're reflecting in particular now about our understanding. Have we realized um, the truth of letting go? Like, do we know what that is? And of course, we can't realize the truth of letting go of craving unless we get to know it. And this really speaks to the importance of this balanced, and especially tonight, this emphasis on patient attention to the experience of craving. Because you could say that the basic pattern is we do experience craving superficially, and we misinterpret it, or we misperceive the craving, and we think, I have to gratify, I have to act on that craving, it's my craving. So we're replacing that sort of reflexive response to craving with a more pervasive and stable, patient curiosity. What is this experience of craving? And you could even add a more specific question. Will craving cease on its own? Does somebody, i.e. me, need to do something for craving to go away? Because even though craving on the surface is kind of juicy, it's activating and makes us feel alive, it doesn't take that much stability of awareness to realize that craving is burning, as the Buddha says, right? The need for things to be other than they are is a kind of burning restlessness, uneasiness. It's a disturbance. So, what do we do with craving? Well, the Buddha says there is craving. It should be abandoned, and it has been abandoned. These are the three insights. But remember, seeing, like appreciating the relevance that craving should be abandoned, right? We hear this in the suttas and the discourses. This is synonymous with nibbana, the cessation of craving, the cessation of greed, anger, and delusion, which are the animating forces of craving, right? Greed, hatred, and delusion. And when that ceases, so it's not so much that I'm going to get in there and make craving go away, but we're really realizing that craving, like everything else, it arises, it ceases, it turns out to be impersonal, not self. But those realizations, that deepening of understanding can only come when, instead of we're reacting to craving, either by going for it and thinking, if I get what I want, then I'll be satisfied, or rejecting craving. Oh, I shouldn't be craving. I'm a Buddhist. I shouldn't have any craving. And then masking it or denying it or imitating being somebody without craving, which is, of course, craving, more craving. We get interested in it. We're willing at least to consider that this is a natural process. And that's why in the guided sit tonight, and I encourage you to, find your way in your home practice of emphasizing a sense of ease and contentment, spaciousness, groundedness. And if you've been practicing for a while, you might be able to call on contentment directly. So just to review, a couple of weeks ago I sent out that, I guess, a little bit of a cheat sheet in this discourse. For each of the four noble truths, there are three insights that develop. So it's really thought of as a natural, lawful progression. And so this first study, the first noble truth, there is dukkha. There is this pervasive unsatisfactoriness when we get close, when we look carefully at our experience. There really is this natural dissatisfaction with experience. And this dissatisfaction is sort of a natural response when we're looking at experience from a self-centered point of view, which is our ordinary way of relating to our experiences in life. Then, because things are changing, there will be this pervasive dissatisfaction, because we can't really get the ground, the final ground that gives me perfect satisfaction. We never get there. And that's dissatisfying, right? It's destabilizing. And the next three insights, so the first three, there is dukkha, should be understood. It has been understood. There is a cause. This cause should be abandoned. It has been abandoned. And this is really the natural response. So when wisdom begins to see the truth of dukkha, there is this pervasive dissatisfaction. It's relevant, been paying attention to it. It's my teacher. I'm stable with it. And then we begin to see that the dukkha as a natural impersonal process, right? Oh, craving arises, craving ceases, craving's not self. So the second noble truth is there is craving, there is a cause for this dissatisfaction, this uneasiness. My mind, because of habit, is taking taking desire personally. It's taking craving personally. And when craving is taken personally, right, then this activity of the mind and body is compelled to react. It feels threatened by not getting, it feels like it's going to be rewarded by getting, because it's personalized desire, which is a very natural thing to arise. But when we misunderstand desire and we infuse it, imbibe it with a sense of self, a permanent self, then desire becomes, I guess you could say, toxic, right? It's a real cause for suffering. And then the third noble truth, which we'll begin to reflect on next week, there is cessation, right? Suffering arises, suffering ceases. So we can notice that cessation, and the mind, wisdom understands this cessation needs to be fully realized. It has been fully realized. What is, like the heart gets curious, wisdom gets curious about this mind, this heart, free of craving. What is that? You know, we can tell ourselves stories, we can imagine what it is, but can we realize this life, this heart, not animated by craving? What would our life feel and look like? Right? That's an interesting thing to be, I mean, that's something to be curious about. So the fourth noble truth then is there is a way to the end of suffering. There's a path, right? This path should be developed. It has been developed. So just the short version of the Four Noble Truths, there is suffering, and this suffering is conditional. It arises, meaning it's a lawful arising in our hearts, and that means there's some supporting causes. When there's craving, there's suffering, right? And that, like everything, craving ceases. That's also a lawful thing that the wisdom can understand. When the supporting causes for craving aren't there, then craving isn't there. Oh, well, what are the supporting causes that are there for craving to rise? With that identification with desire, that attachment to desire. When there's no attachment to desire, craving ceases. And we get a little taste of the freedom the Buddha points to. And the path is really supported by the insight that suffering is not self. Suffering is, but no sufferer can be found, is a line from one of the ancient Buddhist texts. Suffering is, but no sufferer can be found. And we see that on these three areas of the path that we'll talk about at the end of the course. The area of sila, ethical conduct, how we relate to each other. The area of samadhi, how we relate to the activity of our mind. And the area of wisdom or view, how the mind conceives, how the mind views, understands. And if we're taking any of those three areas of our life personally, that's not the way. So can we engage on this level of morality? Can we live with each other in harmony without personalizing? Is there a way to be engaged, to be a friend, to be a leader, to be a follower, to have the roles and responsibilities we have in life without projecting this sort of separate self in that mix. So that's the Eightfold Path, is really understanding there is suffering, it arises lawfully, it ceases, and it's not self. That whole process of suffering arising and ceasing isn't personal. And then the path is really about integrating that it isn't personal, this truth of anatta, that things arise and pass and are not self. So a little bit more about craving, and I mentioned earlier, so at 8:35 I'll stop, and for those who want to have time tonight to meet in small groups, Michelle will help us break into small groups. Those who are interested will go to a Zoom room. Michelle will divide you into groups of 3 or so, and you'll have about 20 minutes to have a conversation. And the conversation is really like, what have we learned in our life? And more importantly, these last couple of weeks, about this identification with desire and that craving that arises with the identification with desire. There's a problem, and the suffering arises, and moments of seeing that ceasing. It's such a remarkable moment, and I'm sure that we've all had it where we've really been obsessed about wanting something, and all of a sudden, without getting what we wanted, the mind is no longer obsessed. It lasts, it can last for a long time. We can be caught in that vortex for certainly hours, maybe not continuously. And if we get really good, we'll see that discontinuity of our obsession with whatever our current obsession might be. And to really have a moment of recognizing that that desiring with attachment has ceased. And when there was desiring with attachment, craving, there was a personal problem. I had a problem, right? I want this. And now wisdom sees it's not there. And it has a momentary taste of having been bound up. Now what's there is the release of having been bound up. Now this all sounds very ordinary, but there's something extraordinary that begins to happen. We become changed when we train our mind to notice that craving arises, suffering arises, and it ceases. And that's really the work, the insight of the second noble truth. Suffering arises and it ceases. So these are some quotes from the suttas, from the discourses. People who are not free from lust for who are not free from lust for sensual pleasures, who are devoured by craving for sensual pleasures, who burn with the fevers of sensual pleasures, still indulge in sensual pleasures, i.e., all of us, right? At least in moments, for sure. The more we indulge, the more our craving for sensual pleasures increase, and the more we're burned by the fever of them. Yet, we find a certain measure of satisfaction and enjoyment independence on these sensual pleasures. Sights that we like to see, sounds that we like to hear, smells that we like to smell, tastes that we like to taste, and touches that we like to touch. And even thoughts about these sense pleasures that we like to think, right? There's a certain pleasure. And the Buddha doesn't reject that pleasure. Hopefully you probably can guess what the Buddha says. We should get to know, right? We want to really know the experience of gratification. Just like, and he goes on to talk about, we really want to get to know the experience, the drawbacks of this dependence or this craving for sense pleasure. Formerly, when I lived the household life, this is the Buddha, I enjoyed myself, provided and endowed with sense pleasure. On later occasions, having understood as they really are, gratification, the drawbacks or defects and disadvantages, and the release in the case of sense pleasure, I abandon craving for them. I remove the fever of them, and I dwell without thirst, with a heart inwardly at peace. There is delight apart from sense pleasure, apart from unwholesome states, which surpasses even the most sublime bliss. Since I take delight in that, I do not envy what is inferior, nor do I delight therein. So what is this higher happiness, let's call it, that the Buddha is pointing to? Because we know the happiness of getting what we want. It's something. The Buddha, like I said, he talks about gratification in a way, for me, that's very trustworthy. Like just acknowledging there is gratification. It should be understood, right? We want to understand that experience of gratification, because in really getting intimate with the experience of gratification, we begin to understand the drawback of the dependence on sense experience. Not the drawback inherent in sense experience, but the drawback inherent in our dependence on sense experience. And when we really understand the drawback inherent in our dependence and our needing sense experience, because we've personalized our desire, craving, then we think, I need this. And so then we're vulnerable to the sense experiences that come and go. And as you know, nobody is in perfect control of all that movement of sense experiences. I don't always get pleasant sights or pleasant smells and pleasant sounds and pleasant touches and pleasant thoughts. I don't. Sometimes it's nice and pleasant, sometimes it's not. So if I'm conceiving of a me whose happiness is dependent on having pleasantness and away from having unpleasantness, well, then I've created a lot of existential anxiety, because sense pleasures are not under my control, nor are they under anybody's control. Doesn't even matter how privileged you are. I mean, certainly some people with a lot of privilege, a lot of good fortune, might have access to a lot more pleasurable experience than unpleasurable, painful experience. But even those very privileged folks, not in control. So the Buddha says about this is his sort of summation. O practitioners, I set out seeking gratification in the world. Whatever gratification there is in the world, that I have found. I have clearly seen with wisdom just how far the gratification extends. I set out seeking the drawbacks in the world. Whatever drawbacks there are in the world, that I have found. I have clearly seen with wisdom just how far the drawbacks in the world extend. I set out seeking release, freedom from the world. Whatever release there is from the world, from sense experience, that I have found. I have clearly seen with wisdom just how far freedom from the world extends. And this is our path too. It's not enough that the Buddha did this, right? We have to do it ourselves. And I mentioned last week, the Buddha breaks craving down. Craving sense experience, craving to become somebody, craving for things to be done. So the key is to, like I mentioned at the beginning, to stabilize that interest in craving. And you've stabilized when you see that the mind is attached and you're patient with that attachment. You're not afraid of it, right? So you're using some borrowed wisdom, right? Where you look at your attachment, your clinging, your reactivity, and you're practicing seeing it as nature. Oh yeah, this is happening. I'm really overwhelmed. I'm upset. It feels like this. This is how it is sometimes, right? See, with those sorts of, whether you use those actual phrases or something like that, or just have that understanding, you're creating some space. You're normalizing craving as a natural phenomenon, which means you can be patient with it. You can observe it patiently, that it arises, and possibly with patience to see that it ceases. Because the more that we get curious, this wise, stable, present moment awareness with attachment, with the mind that is attached, we're looking at it, observing it, feeling what it feels like, whatever it might be. Wanting to go to bed tonight, wanting the pandemic to be over, wanting the election to be over, and with a certain kind of ending that we prefer, right? And when I'm identified with any of those kinds of desires, right, the heart is burning. It's bound up with that desiring and the identification. And then when that suffering wakes me up and activates wisdom, okay, this is what the Buddha said to contemplate. This is the contemplation of the second noble truth. There is dukkha. Now I understand that. I see the dukkha as a natural, conditional coming and going. It is alive. It's here and now, right here and now in my mind, right? It's only then that with that patient curiosity that we see, oh, the mind is identifying with desire. I'll be satisfied. I'll be happy. I'll be safe when this happens. I need this to go away in order to be safe. I need to become somebody. So it's one of those three kinds of cravings: wanting some experience, wanting to become somebody, wanting to be done with it all, right? And we observe that patiently. We see the cause that should be abandoned, right? What is the cause? All of this activity in the mind and body, it feels very personal. Somebody feels like they're dependent on how things play out. And we just observe that attachment, that clinging, that selfing. We observe it. And like everything, without you making it go away, just being curious about it, it removes the ignorance which attachment depends on. So in a sense, when the mind takes the position of Buddha, the one who knows, it's no longer in the position, the one who craves. So by cultivating this wise and stable and patient presence with craving, the mind has removed the necessary supporting cause for craving, which is ignorance, identification. And then because the cause has been removed, then there will be a moment where craving goes away, the ending of craving. And that stable, mindful awareness will see craving has ceased. And that's a very powerful moment. And we want to start noticing how we become changed the more and more we see how craving ceased without me needing to get something or get rid of something or become somebody. We could be feeling very unloved, not heard, alone, a lot of loneliness and identification with the loneliness, and really feeling the weight of all of that. And then we go through these 12 insights, the first 6 at least. There is dukkha, I'm hurting, it's irrelevant, I'm going to relax with it, I'm going to stabilize some present moment awareness. Now, because I've stabilized with the dukkha of the loneliness, I see what's happening as a dynamic right here. Conditional, lawful unfolding. When the mind is personalizing the not liking of loneliness or the wanting social connection. When the mind's personalizing it, oh yeah, I shouldn't take it so personally, but we just observe that. We don't try to fix it. We just see like this alive tension. Oh yeah, the identification isn't helping. It should be abandoned. This is the root of it all. And it does fall away because now the spacious, non-judging presence removes the identification. Being aware of the mind being identified is not the same as being attached or identified. When we can be stably, mindfully aware of identification, attachment, clinging, then the mind isn't identified with the clinging. And this is a whole path. The Buddhist path is a path of transforming understanding, right? That's the intervention in the endless cycling of suffering. The intervention isn't to kind of get over it or to get better, it's to understand it. Because the repeated cycles of suffering depend on not seeing it clearly. When the heart starts to see things clearly, suffering loses its supporting cause, which is ignorance, not seeing clearly. And I mentioned, I think last week, that Gil Fronsdal just a really powerful interview about, the real insight in the second noble truth is realizing the inconstancy of craving. Craving, like everything else, comes and goes. It's a lawful, conditional thing. And I've been repeating this a lot so that we get interested. And so tonight in the small groups, it's really a chance to begin to just unpack, like, what have you learned about your experience of craving? And I encourage you, whether you do it tonight with the small groups or you find a time in the next few days to have a conversation, to share what you've been learning about craving, that you practice talking about it in impersonal ways. And you hear me modeling that sometimes, there was attachment. I noticed attachment, as opposed to saying I was attached. So I know it can seem like a small thing to leave the personal pronoun out, but we're really training the mind to relate to craving as a natural phenomenon, because that's what it is. It's something that comes and goes, and it's not self. It's a impersonal process. Now it feels, obviously it's here and now in the body, in the mind. That's where we notice the experience of attachment. But what we observe is attachment being known. We don't observe the one who is attached. We observe the phenomena of attachment. So we're just getting very clear about our actual experience of attachment or craving. And really getting curious, is the Buddha or our spiritual elders correct that craving arises and passes away and is not self? Dukkha itself arises and passes away and is not self. I'll just end with this little teaching. This is also from Ajahn Thanisaro, who I mentioned earlier in the evening, a wonderful Buddhist translator and Dharma teacher, Buddhist monk. And he often, or I've read several times, where he refers to a teaching he got from one of his teachers when he was practicing as a monk in Thailand with some of the great forest ajahns, the Thai forest tradition elders. And one of them talked about, mountains are only heavy when you try to lift them. So sense experience and even desire is only a problem when we try to own it or we become dependent on it. And that gives us, I think, for me at least, a very useful clue about how to navigate this human experience of having a lot of desire. And naturally, when you look at a baby, babies after a few months, they know what they want, and they know how to cling to mom or dad, and they know how to get the milk. And They know what they don't like, and they show the world, right? So this sort of movement of desire and this activation of the body and mind in response to desiring is just like part of the living process, right? Part of having a mind and body. But we kind of take a turn at some point in the sort of process of growing up, maybe right there from the beginning. But this desiring, this very natural desiring, is just interpreted as me or mine. And that just sets in motion a lot of suffering. So, we have this sensitive heart, this sensitive body. We have these natural likes and dislikes. But can we navigate this territory of living, having a life, having experience, without being confused by all the natural, unavoidable desires that come our way, that get triggered, let's call it, or stimulated? Oh, the heart wants this. The heart likes that. Heart doesn't want. The heart does want. And just to have a lot of space around it. And to remind yourself, like when there is a strong desire, yeah, there's a strong desire. It feels like this. And the Buddha says, my experience tells me that desires come and go. And even attachment to desire comes and goes. And if I allow the mind to get swept away with attachment, then I'll feel like I'm really suffering. That's just the law. This is the law. And so when you find that you're suffering, just say, oh, what's the heart attached to? In order for there to be suffering, in order for me to feel like I'm really suffering, my heart must be attached. Well, where is that? So these are some of the things you can share about in your small group tonight. Just like take a little vignette in your craving life. Oh yeah, 2 days ago I had this little craving storm, right? And this is what I learned about that.